Hi, I'm Josh McGrath.
I'm Andrew Haas.
And this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Today we conclude our 8-part series on having a vision for the year. And today we've saved the best for last. Today we are talking about the practical steps that you need to take in your life to see that vision come to pass. So Andrew, I think that for humans in general, we tend to fall into this trap of having aspirational vision and plans and then not executing on them. And then finding ourselves frustrated and annoyed that our lives are not where we had dreamed they would be. And specifically for men, when it comes to having a vision for their life or for the year, it's so easy for, men to plan out, whether it's, on a whiteboard or a Google Doc or a journal, this aspirational vision for the year. And it looks amazing on paper, but then the rubber has to hit the road. You actually have to begin to execute on it. And the reality is that today's the day to do it. Every day that passes that you don't move forward on that vision is a day that you've lost in seeing that vision come to reality in your life.
Well, men are very good at dreaming big, at having big ideas, big plans. That is not hard for most men. What is hard for most men is executing. And that is a fundamental challenge for all men. And it's something that if you don't work at it, it's actually going to become harder the more life you live. Moving forward, taking steps towards something, men are designed to move. But, as men who don't move, who just have ideas, too many of us just get stuck in that sphere of, I would love to do this. I think this is a great idea. Man, this should be a thing. And we can just think of these great ideas and have, ideal and noble motives. But if it doesn't actually result in us taking steps forward, it really doesn't mean anything.
And opportunity builds on opportunity. We oftentimes don't like to take that first step or that first, those first 10 steps because they seem insignificant. But those are the first steps that are required to see a vision come to fulfillment. And today we're going to talk about really 2 key areas that are important for men to keep in mind. One is, to be an adult. Men have to step up and be an adult. And the second area is that men need to actually take action. So let's start with this idea of men need to be an adult.
So men should purpose to grow in maturity, grow in responsibility, take on more burdens, if you will. And that should be happening sooner in life rather than later. That is something all young men should be encouraged toward from others, but also themselves. There should be a growing internal, maybe not a desire, but at least an internal motivation and determination to, I'm going to take on more responsibility. I'm going to take steps. I'm going to move forward. Even if I don't know specifically what the outcome is going to be, a lot of men don't move because there's uncertainty or there's an unknown. And men like to know what's around the corner. We like to know what's next. And if we don't know, sometimes we just sit still.
A lot of men today aren't stepping up to do the adult things. I mean, I'm talking pretty basic things like show up on time to meetings and appointments, actually paying your bills, actually being aware of where all the important paperwork in your life is stored, things, like IDs, or, if you have a car, what's it called? The registration, the title, the insurance, things like that. It's so easy for men to rely on other people in their lives to take care of them, whether that's a parent, a sibling, a friend, or tragically, oftentimes, a girlfriend or wife. It's like, bro, you need to be responsible and do the adult thing. Know where that paperwork is. Know when you have a meeting. Know what time you need to leave the house to show up to that appointment on time.
And too often, guys will let their life or life circumstances dictate where their time goes. And I think a big challenge for men is to take that back and under their control and dictate where they will spend their time. Now, you don't always get to choose where your time is spent.
Sure.
You got to work a job, pay the bills. Sometimes your time will be allocated to something that you don't have control over. But that's okay because you've determined the reason for that is actually for something bigger and better.
And men will make excuses time and time again for how they spend their resources, how they spend their time, for their lack of executing on a vision. And part of being an adult is taking responsibility for where you're at in life. Part of being an adult is taking responsibility for the way that you stewarded the 24 hours that you have each day. Part of being an adult is taking responsibility for your failures, for when you hurt or offend somebody else, for when you let down somebody, like being quick to apologize and repent, to not make excuses time and time again for where you're at in life or why you did what you did or why this thing failed, or to lay blame on others and to say, well, whether it's in a work context, a friend's context, or, a romantic relationship context, to lay blame on everybody else, but to be quick to say, hey, I have a role in this, I have a responsibility in this, and I'm going to own my failures and not lay blame elsewhere for why things happened the way they did.
Yeah, far too often culture and life makes it far too easy for us to blame external factors. And life certainly has challenges and difficulties. That's not what we're talking about. But to orient yourself toward the reasons for something not happening or the reason for failure, to consistently be something external, the community I live in, the job I have, the friends I have, whatever it is, you could find a reason externally for why some problem exists or why you haven't gotten somewhere. But really, we're challenging men to reorient their thinking toward, yes, there are challenges out there. I'm faced with some hard realities, but what can I do? What can I own? And put more of your mental effort and energy toward what you can do.
Yeah. I think about this idea of, having an aspirational, vision for your life. And this is going to lead into our second area of exploration, which is, actually doing it. I know we've referenced this podcast before, but it's such a good example because, initially when we had the idea of starting a podcast, that's an aspirational vision. And then we got even more aspirational. We designed it in a design program of what the studio could look like. And it's like, man, that looks amazing. And so on paper, the idea of a podcast and even what it would look like was very inspiring. But if that's as far as it went, if we didn't actually do it, that's kind of worthless. We can all have great ideas. And so going from the vision of a podcast, a design of what a studio could look like, to actually practically finding a space and building the studio, leveraging our time, talents, resources, finances to make that happen. And then here we are, a year later, working hard to produce a podcast. We're not in this because it makes us money.
Not yet.
Not yet, but very much the opposite. But the reason why we're in this is because we had a vision to speak to a cultural problem, and we wanted to actually do it. We wanted to actually provide a solution. And so this next area that we're going to talk about briefly is the importance of actually doing something.
Too many men get stuck in not moving forward because they don't have full clarity on where they should be going. And for most men, it's going to be better to do something.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know exactly the right direction to head or the right steps to take, something is better than nothing. Now, obviously, we're not talking about being reckless. Do due diligence. But in general, most men, we don't actually do something because we're trying to collect more information. We want to have more answers. We want to further be able to figure out what the best option is. But for most men, just start, just do something. And if you got to pivot, great.
Yeah, go out and get a job, right? Like maybe you want that really fancy, corner office job, but all that's available is stocking shelves right now. Go stock shelves. Maybe you want the really nice Tesla, but all you can afford is a $5,000 rusty car. Go buy the $5,000 rusty car so that then you can drive to your job stocking shelves. So often men have an aspirational vision of what they want. They want the beautiful car. They want the high-paying job. They want the amazing office. They want the amazing travel experience. And they're unwilling to do any of the basic steps that every single human has to go through to eventually get themselves there. The guy with the fancy office didn't start his first job in a fancy office. You know, I actually just read this, right up on Pope Francis, talking about some of the jobs he held before he was Pope. And one of his jobs was to be a nightclub bouncer, which is just hilarious.
Wow, there's a transition.
Right? So that just illustrates, his first job out of, seminary was not to become Pope. And in the same way for men, it's really important that they just take the next step. It's so easy to discredit that next step because it's unsexy, to discredit that next step because it's not the ultimate thing that you want. But it's the next step in the journey that leads you to the destination.
And there are so many things, there's so many intangibles in living out life, in taking on responsibility. You mentioned buying a car, it could be moving out, getting an apartment, buying a home. All those things take some planning, they take some processing, but to simply say, oh, I can't do this because I need to save money, or I can't do that. It's easy to come up with reasons not to do something.
For sure.
Legitimate sounding reasons.
Yep.
But I would argue that taking on those responsibilities, taking on more of life, there are so many intangibles for young men, well, for all men, but young men in particular, as you bear more, as you take on greater responsibility, there is so much that you learn that you really can't see it even ahead of time.
One of the major differences between you and other men of success is whether or not you're just willing to do the hard thing. I think about, after college, producer Ben and I ended up going to Uganda to make a documentary following the water crisis and relief efforts there. Now, neither of us had ever made a documentary before. Neither of us had been to Africa before. Neither of us really knew much about run and gun shooting in the wilderness of Uganda. But we were just kind of like, well, let's do this. And so you just kind of begin to figure it out. And it wasn't like we did it because we were going to make money. It cost us money. And it cost us a bunch of time. And I almost died in Africa. And it was like, the documentary would have been more successful had I died. But, as a result, it wasn't as successful. But we just did it. And that process of being faithful to just do something rather than just talk about it led us to not only gain new talents and abilities and stories, to opening up a door a few years later to working with the piano manufacturer Steinway. And so we ended up with a contract doing a documentary with them. And so fast forward, again, not to bring it back to the podcast, by the time we got here, to starting a podcast, the video production, the sound design element of it was like a no-brainer. We already knew how to do all of that. And so, if someone were to look here at this moment and say, well, how do you go about starting a podcast? I'm like, well, go back 15 years and try to make a documentary in Africa. Like, that's where it starts. I mean, it starts even earlier than that because, Ben and I were making videos in high school together. So, go back to the early 2000s, get a really crappy handheld camcorder, and make short videos. That's really where it starts.
Yeah, there's a quote I heard a while ago now. It's one of those ones that stick with you, and I don't know where it came from, but I'll paraphrase, and it says, success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration.
It's good.
And I think more men could live by that.
Yeah.
We think we have to have the perfect idea or a well-formulated idea, and that's 90% of it. And then it's easy to execute. It's actually flipped.
Yeah.
Start with something, but it's gonna take a lot of hard work.
Yeah. I want to talk about this concept of ditching the boyhood mindset. A lot of men today, sadly, while their age says that they're a man, their mindset, their mentality, and their actions are that of a boy. Probably a lot of women listening to this are saying amen right now. And one of the ways we see this played out, we're going to look at a few different areas, but one of the ways we see this played out is this expectation of people helping them constantly or opening the doors for them so that they have the opportunity, essentially giving them a handout. You know, whether that's looking to mom and dad, whether that's looking to a friend, whether that's looking to institutions or the government. And when that doesn't happen, for them to then basically identify as being oppressed or put down or shut out. And it's like, well, I'm just not like that person. And what's ironic is, you know, when you listen to a lot of Hollywood celebrity stories, they're like normal, oftentimes very poor people who, like, until they get their break, like, are just hustling and they aren't expecting a handout. They're going to auditions. They're working 2 and 3 side jobs. They're taking every low-paying job opportunity they can in order to build their resume. And it's easy to vilify them now once they're successful and they're multimillionaires and they're famous to be like, yeah, you just don't know what it's like. But for the vast majority of them, they actually do, because that's where they started. And so men need to move out of this boyhood mindset of like, well, someone's got to give me a handout or a hand up in order for me to be successful. No, you have the ability to hustle yourself to be successful.
And one of the easiest ways for young men in particular to get out of this boyhood mindset is to take on responsibility in whatever environment you find yourself in, even if it's at home. Too often, young guys in particular will delay taking on responsibility until that next season, or until college starts, or until high school starts, or until they move out, or if they're at a friend's house, or if they're at work. Those are then I bear some additional responsibility. But even if it's an interim place, if you're staying somewhere for a week, or you're living at home and you're going to be moving out soon, whatever your situation is, young men can take on responsibility wherever they are. And look, and the thing is, men have to look for those opportunities. They're not just going to come to you. And so it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. Is this helpful? Is this helpful? Do I help here? Do I help here? Is this where I'm most helpful? Is this my skill set? So there's a bit of figuring out, but that's what men are here to do. Lean in, figure out what's helpful, no matter where you find yourself.
And one of the ways that you move from boyhood mindset into a manhood mindset is by taking the wisdom and counsel given to you by older men and actually applying it. Over the years, I know you and I have both met with younger men to just walk with them through life. And it's not uncommon where these younger men will ask a question along the lines of like, how do I get to where you are? And when I give them the advice of like the very simple thing, like get a job, 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever, 6 a.m. to 4, get that job and be consistent in it. It's like, well, no, I mean, like that's, I don't want to do that. Like, what do I do to get where you are though? I'm like, get that job. They're like, well, yeah, but like that doesn't pay very much. I'm like, okay, who cares? You're getting the job to develop a skill, and it might not be the skill of stacking shelves that you're developing, but the skill of being consistent, of being dependable, of being reliable, of customer service, of being able to receive direction from a manager. Those are the skills you're learning that then you'll be able to bring with you into other spheres of life. And it's so easy for young men to think they know better and for them to not take the counsel and wisdom that they're given, and for another year to pass to be in the same exact place where they were, not having developed any more as a man, not having developed any more skills, not having developed any closer to a vision for their life. They're just content to be where they are until such a point as then they start making excuses for where they are.
And the goal for men is that over time, you become more dependable, more reliable, and more consistent. And so that is an easy way to, you can self-reflect. A year from now, are you more dependable? Do the people around you generally see you as more reliable? And these are easy ways for men to grow.
Bringing it back to relationships, one of the things that I think is very ironic is that while meeting with young men, they will oftentimes turn the conversation to wanting to to be dating a woman. And my advice will be, well, great desire. Let's put a pause on that. And let's focus on some of these other areas in your life that are really important to have in play first. And they will ignore those other areas and come back and tell me that they're now dating a woman. And I'm uncertain. I would have to take a while to think through it. I don't know if any man who has done that has ended up in a long-term relationship with that woman and or married to her.
And if they have, it's probably the outlier.
Yeah, definitely the outlier. And again, while we are encouraging men to, pursue romantic relationships and we want to see that happen, there are certain things that have to be in play in your life first. You need to be a man of responsibility before you can be a man of relationship. And a lot of these simple things where you're just acting on the next step can be viewed as very, unsexy.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, men don't want to do them. They're oftentimes, in the hidden moments of our lives where they're not being recognized, where people aren't applauding us, where we don't feel like we're making massive jumps, where it's like these incremental movements. But it's the faithfulness of that over time that produces life-changing results. And so one of the things we want to encourage men here today as we're, concluding our 8-part series is that you actually need to do something. Stop sitting around, stop waiting, stop hoping, stop dreaming, start executing.
And to further clarify that point, I would say that young men need to ditch the practice of just leaning into things that they primarily benefit from. Mm-hmm. That is a pitfall that too many guys fall into, and they establish a life around that. And it's really hard to get out of that once you're going down that road. It is really hard to change course.
One of the things that men will need to implement in their life to execute on, visions, hopes, dreams, etc., is to utilize practical tools that are available to them. These are, and we're getting very practical here, mm-hmm. things like a calendar.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of guys who are just like, I'll just remember that. And I'm like, you won't. And then I go to meet with them, and sure enough, they're not there to meet with me. Why? Because they don't use a calendar. Mm-hmm. Or an alarm clock to get up. They're like, I'll just get up. Next thing you know, they're sleeping until 9, 10, 11 o'clock. They're missing work. They're missing events because they were going to wake up on their own. Budgeting apps. We're not going to go through a full list here, but there are very simple tools that men you can use. If you constantly lose your credit card, get a wallet. If you constantly lose your wallet, get a bag. If you constantly lose your keys, get an AirTag. Like, do something to make you more responsible mm-hmm. and to help you to be an adult.
Mm-hmm. And if any one of those solutions isn't working, that doesn't mean the whole idea is bad. It just means find a better version of that. If some alarm clock isn't waking you up in the morning, we'll get a different alarm clock.
Yeah.
Find what works. If some budgeting app isn't working for you, okay, there's 1,000 budgeting apps. Like, put in the time, find something that works mm-hmm. so you can establish these healthy habits.
Now, practical isn't pointless. Today, we're trying to help men be very practical in taking the next step on their vision for the year. And it's easy to view that next practical step as being fairly pointless in the grand scheme of things. And I want to park here for a bit, because if our listeners take away nothing else, I want them to understand that the practical next step is extremely valuable and is the only way you're ever going to get closer to the vision, the hope, mm-hmm. or the dream that you have. I'm going to give an example. It's not uncommon when working particularly with young men that they need to purchase a car at some point, especially to have a job. Mm-hmm. And they'll save up, $5,000, and I'll get talking to them about the importance of buying a car. And they'll be like, well, the thing is, like, I really want, a Tesla or something. And I'm like, okay, great. When you're 30 or 40 or 50, get a Tesla. And they're like, yeah, but that's what I want right now. And I'm like, but do you have $5,000? Like, well, I can put that down on the Tesla. I'm like, no, you buy a $5,000 car today. And it's, well, the car would have rust. It's not the car that I want. It's an old car. It doesn't have all the features. I can't control it with an app. Like, who cares? Buy the $5,000 car so that you can drive to work. And the reason why you need to drive to work is so that you can earn money. And the reason you need to earn money is because you want to be in a relationship. And you're telling me how you want to date a girl, and I'm telling you, you need a car. And you're like, well, she's going to like me more if I have a Tesla. And I'm like, no, she's not. She's going to like you more if you have money.
You don't want to discount those micro moments where, how do you go from buying a cheap car to having more success in a relationship? Two totally different ideas. But if you start with some healthy habits and you build from there and you keep going and you keep going, when the time comes, when that day comes where you're going to pursue somebody, you're going to have years, hopefully, of habits, of healthy routines, of good decision making, so that when it comes time for a relationship, that muscle is going to be worked.
Yeah.
And so your likelihood and your ability to make good decisions in a relationship is going to be a lot more.
It's interesting because I'm just thinking about this now. I'm going to venture that men who are consistent in a lot of those, micro moments, doing a lot of those just practical next steps over the long haul, are more confident men. And so when it comes time to pursue a romantic relationship, they exude a confidence. They enter into that process in a very confident way that's not dependent upon whether the woman says yes or no. It's not dependent upon their status financially or career-wise, but there's a confidence that they exude because they've been faithful over the course of years, and they can point back to the success along the way. And that makes them a more attractive person by and large to women. I think that men who aren't faithful to steward well all those micro moments tend to be more insecure, and their security is dependent upon what people think about them, what people say about them, the response of the woman to their overtures. And so if the woman turns them down, they're like all in a hissy fit and got to spend the next 6 months recovering from the being told no. Whereas a man who's learned to be faithful in thousands of micro moments over the course of years, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna take that, steward this next moment of opportunity, and I'm gonna ask her if she wants to go out on a date. She says no. I'm venturing he's probably not too put out by that. He might be disappointed, but he's going to move on quickly because he's a man of confidence. Why? Because he can point to thousands of micro moments where he was faithful along the way and has led to different successes in his life.
All those moments will build a man's confidence. And yes, the world needs more competent and confident men. Too often we'll be one or the other. We'll have an awesome skill set, but we won't be confident. Or we'll be overly confident and not many skills to speak of. And as men, we've got to grow in both.
The reality is that if you, as a man, do not take the next practical step in your life to move towards a vision, towards a direction, time is going to pass you by, and you will find yourself in the same spot, in the same house, with the same, ambition, with the same job, with the same financial status, with the same relationship status. And you will see a world that's passing you by. And time is the one thing you can't get back. And so you will frivolously waste away months, years, or decades of your life. And instead of advancing in career and finances and skills and ability and relationships and community and in influence, you will remain just as you are, no better, and probably worse off. And that should be a sobering reality check for men that scares them enough into actually doing something with their life. Because we live in a day and age where men, by and large, don't do anything.
I mean, and you can think of it this way. Anything you put off until tomorrow or next week, you are then delaying everything else you will do in life by that amount of time. If you put off something until tomorrow, you're going to delay by a day everything else you will have accomplished in your life.
Yeah. And this isn't about, being at extreme in everything. but it's about just stepping out and doing something. The world would be a better place if men just stepped out and actually did something, even at the expense of failure.
Yes, because failure is actually not a problem.
Yeah.
And too many of us view it as problematic. But failing isn't the problem. It's do we learn from our failures?
Yeah.
Do we figure out what went wrong and correct or fix? That's the real win.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times that, it's easy to stay silent in a conversation or in an important cause because, well, I'm not an eloquent public speaker. I don't know if I'd have the right words to say. I haven't really studied up on this enough. But you have a conviction and you know what you think and you want to say something. Like so often men will just remain silent in the face of either evil or unhealth because they're like, I don't know, I'm not that person to say something. It's like, no, step out and say something. Be wise about it, but step out and say something. If men started doing that more and more, what a different world, what a different culture we would be in today.
We'd be in a much better place.
We would be. And so our encouragement as we're concluding this series is to encourage men, start doing something. Because snap, and suddenly it's going to be December 31st. We're going to be talking about setting a vision for 2026. And the question is, are you going to arrive at that moment being in a different place than you were December 31st, 2024? Or are you going to arrive at that place and it's the same exact place you were in 1 year ago and nothing's changed?
And you'll have a lot of good ideas, a lot of interesting thoughts, a lot of big ambitions, but it stops there.
And you'll probably still be single.
Very likely.
So as we conclude here, this is hopefully a sobering conversation for you. We covered several different ideas, but here's the takeaway. You need to do something. We've talked about 7 other parts of setting a vision for this year. This 8th part is about you actually acting on all those different visions that you've set up for your life. And if you don't act on it, no one else will. No one's gonna handhold you to the finish line. No one's gonna handhold you to success. No one's gonna handhold you into a relationship. This is dependent upon you. And if you're unable to lead yourself, you will never be able to lead a romantic relationship. You'll never be able to lead a wife. You'll never be able to lead a family. So it starts today with action. It starts today with doing something. And so our plea to you is to not let another day, another week, another month go by without acting on your vision, without taking the next step of obedience, without, acting on those practical next steps and advancing in those micro moments that are unseen that no one knows about. Because if you take those steps of faithfulness, you're going to arrive at December 31st, 2025 in a completely different place than you are today. As always, we love having you here on the Art and Pursuit podcast, and we look forward to having you here next time.